The rancher had buried his wife and unborn child 5 years ago, swearing he'd never risk that pain again. Then his mail-order bride arrived carrying another man's baby, and he did something that made the entire town think he'd lost his mind. He claimed them both. Silas Corrigan had been waiting at the Sweetwater Basin Depot since the first gray whisper of dawn, his hat clenched in hands worn rough from years of work and silence. 5 years of loneliness had finally driven him to place that advertisement in the Philadelphia paper, a quiet plea for companionship he'd barely had the courage to send. Only one reply had come, a neatly penned letter from a woman named Catherine Brennan. Her words had been measured, her tone hopeful, and Silas had let himself imagine a beginning he thought he'd never have. When the stagecoach door creaked open, the driver helped a young woman step down, dark hair tucked beneath a modest bonnet, green eyes bright with fear and stubbornness, and a belly round with a child, full and undeniable, something no letter had ever breathed a word about. The depot went silent. Silas heard Mrs. Holcomb gasp behind him, heard the blacksmith mutter something crude, but Silas couldn't move. He stared at Catherine as she stood there, one hand protectively cradling her stomach, the other gripping a worn traveling bag. She lifted her chin. "Mr. Corrigan, I'm Catherine Brennan. I understand if you want to send me back on the next stage." Her voice carried across the platform, steady despite the trembling in her hands. Silas saw it then, the same thing he'd carried for 5 long years: grief, loss, the kind of pain that carved itself into your bones and never quite let go. His late wife Margaret had died bringing their child into the world. The baby girl had lived only 3 hours. Silas had sworn he'd never risk that kind of heartbreak again. He'd wanted a companion, someone to share the silence of his ranch, nothing more. But looking at Catherine now, seeing the desperate hope warring with resignation in her eyes, something cracked open inside his chest. He stepped forward and took her bag. "Welcome to Montana Territory, Mrs. Corrigan." Catherine's eyes went wide. "You're not sending me back?" Silas wiped at his face, not caring who saw the tears. "No, ma'am. I'm taking you home." The crowd erupted in whispers, but Silas ignored them. He guided Catherine toward his wagon, his hand steady at her elbow. She climbed up with difficulty, and he saw the exhaustion in every movement. As he settled onto the bench beside her and took up the reins, Catherine spoke quietly. "I should have told you in my letters. I was afraid you'd refuse me, and I had nowhere else to go." Silas clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward, carrying them away from the judgment of Sweetwater Basin and toward the ranch that sprawled across the valley beyond. "We've all got things we're afraid of," he said. "Reckon we'll figure it out together." Catherine pulled her shawl tighter and said nothing more, but Silas caught her watching him from the corner of her eye. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road ahead, and somewhere in the distance a hawk cried out as it circled the Montana sky. The ranch house appeared as they crested the final hill. Catherine sat up straighter, taking in the weathered cabin, the barn, the corrals where cattle grazed in the fading light. "It's not much," Silas said, "but it's sturdy, keeps the wind out." "It's more than I hoped for," Catherine whispered. He helped her down and carried her bag inside. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and little else. Silas led her to the bedroom and set her bag on the quilt-covered bed. "You'll take this room. I'll sleep in the barn loft." Catherine turned to him, confusion crossing her face. "Mr. Corrigan, you don't have to—" "Silas," he interrupted. "And yes, I do." He left before she could argue, closing the door gently behind him. That first evening, Silas cooked salt pork and beans over the fire while Catherine sat rigid at the table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The silence between them felt enormous, wide and echoing, like a canyon neither of them knew how to cross. He set a plate in front of her and took his seat opposite. Catherine nudged her food around with her fork, barely taking a bite. At last, she placed the utensil down with a soft clink. "Why didn't you send me back?" Silas froze mid-chew. He'd been waiting for that question since they left town. "Saw something in your eyes at the depot," he said quietly. "Same thing I see in the mirror every morning." "And what's that?" "Someone who's lost everything." Catherine's jaw trembled before she forced it still. She looked away, blinking fast. When she met his gaze again, her voice had steadied into something resolute. "I need you to understand something," she said. "I answered your advertisement knowing I could be turned away. My father disowned me when he learned about the baby, called me a disgrace to the family name. I had no money, no prospects, nowhere left to go." Silas set down his own fork. "The father? Gone." The word came out bitter. "Dalton Greer. A charming drifter who swept me off my feet with pretty promises. The moment I told him about the baby, he disappeared like smoke. That's his loss." Catherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is it, or is it mine?" Silas stood and walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. His next words came slowly, dredged up from a place he'd buried deep. 5 years ago, my wife Margaret was carrying our first child. She was strong, healthy, full of life. Then labor came and everything went wrong." He paused, his throat working. "The doctor couldn't stop the bleeding. She died at sunrise. The baby, a little girl, lived 3 hours. Catherine's breath caught. "Silas, I'm so sorry." I blamed myself. Still, made a vow I'd never put another woman through that risk. Never have children, never marry again. He turned to face her. "Then you stepped off that stagecoach and I saw you protecting that baby, even though the whole town was judging you. That takes a kind of courage I haven't had in 5 years. You think I'm brave?" Catherine shook her head. "I'm terrified every single day. Terrified I'll fail this child. Terrified of what's coming. Terrified that you'll change your mind and I'll end up on the streets." Silas crossed back to the table and sat down. "I won't change my mind. We'll make this work, Catherine. We don't have to be husband and wife in the usual sense, but we can help each other survive." Catherine studied his face in the firelight. "You're still afraid. I can see it." "Every day," he admitted. "But maybe being afraid together is better than being afraid alone." She reached across the table. Her hand stopped halfway, hovering in the space between them. Silas looked at it, then slowly extended his own. Their fingers touched, tentative and uncertain. "I won't be Margaret," Catherine said quietly. "I know. But I need you to promise me something. If anything happens during the birth, you save the baby, not me." "Catherine, promise me, Silas." He pulled his hand back, standing abruptly. "I can't make that promise. I won't." "Why not?" "Because I already lost one family to that choice. I won't lose another." The fire crackled in the hearth. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the gaps in the barn walls where Silas would spend another sleepless night, listening for any sound from the house, praying he hadn't made a terrible mistake. But somewhere beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 weeks slipped by in a fragile rhythm. Catherine rose before sunrise to cook breakfast while Silas headed out to tend the cattle. They ate together in a quiet, measured way before parting for the day, each retreating to responsibilities that kept them from having to face the uncertainty between them. Catherine threw herself into restoring the neglected house. She scrubbed years of dust from forgotten corners, opened windows that hadn't been touched in ages, and hung curtains she'd sewn from flour sacks to make the place feel less lonely. Silas worked the ranch from dawn until the sky bruised with dusk, yet he was never far. Always within earshot, always watching. She noticed how his shoulders tightened whenever she moved too fast, how his gaze lingered on her when she carried buckets of water from the well, how he'd placed a chair on the porch in just the right spot so he could see her through the kitchen window, as if making sure she wouldn't disappear. One afternoon, she was reaching for a high shelf when pain ripped through her belly. She gasped and grabbed the counter, knocking a jar to the floor. It shattered. Silas burst through the door. What happened? Nothing, I just dropped. Another contraction seized her. She doubled over, crying out. Silas went white. The baby, is it coming? I don't know. Catherine's voice came out strangled. It's too early. It can't be. He scooped her up before she could protest and carried her to the bedroom. His hands shook as he settled her on the bed. I'm getting the doctor. Silas, wait. But he was already gone. She heard the barn door slam, heard hoofbeats thundering away. Catherine lay there, breathing through the pain, terrified and alone. The contractions came in waves, then gradually eased. By the time Silas returned with Dr. Brennan, an older man with kind eyes and steady hands, Catherine was sitting up, embarrassed. False labor, the doctor announced after examining her. Common this late in pregnancy. The baby's fine, but you need rest. No heavy lifting, no stress. After the doctor left, Silas stood in the doorway, his hat still in his hands. I thought, his voice cracked, I thought I was losing you both. Come here, Catherine said softly. He didn't move. Please, Silas. He crossed to the bed and sank onto the chair beside it. Catherine had never seen a man look so broken. You can't keep living like this, she said. Afraid to breathe. Afraid to be near me. Afraid of what might happen. I don't know how to stop. Then talk to me. Tell me about Margaret, not just how she died. Tell me who she was. Silas's jaw worked. For a long moment, Catherine thought he'd refuse. Then words began spilling out, rough and halting at first, then flowing like a dam had broken. He told her about Margaret's laugh, how it sounded like bells, how she'd loved thunderstorms and hated mornings, how she'd sing while cooking, always off-key, how she'd dreamed of filling the ranch with children, building a legacy in this harsh territory. She wanted 6 kids, Silas said, his voice barely above a whisper. 6. I laughed and told her we'd start with 1 and see how we managed. Catherine reached for his hand. This time he didn't pull away. She sounds wonderful. She was. Silas looked at their joined hands. But she's gone and I'm still here, and I don't know what to do with that. You keep living, Catherine said. You honor her by not letting fear steal what's left of your life. What if I can't protect you? What if you can? Silas lifted his eyes to hers. In them, Catherine saw a war being waged between grief and possibility. Stay tonight, she said. Not in the barn, just sit here. Talk to me. He nodded slowly. That night, Silas dragged the chair close to Catherine's bedside and spoke to her in a low, steady voice until her eyelids began to droop. He told her stories about Margaret, about the ranch as it used to be, about the Montana sky and how it glowed when the first October snow drifted down like feathers. Catherine drifted into sleep to the rhythm of his words, warm, gentle, grounding, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she felt truly safe. Outside the window, stars cut through the darkness, cold, brilliant, and impossibly distant. Catherine needed fabric for the baby and a handful of supplies she simply couldn't make on her own. Silas offered to go in her place, but she refused. She wouldn't spend the rest of her life hiding from people's judgment. Sweetwater Basin's main street buzzed with Saturday noise, but the moment Catherine stepped down from the wagon, the atmosphere shifted, conversations faltered, eyes followed her. Mothers pulled their children a little closer, as though disgrace might cling to their skirts. Inside the general store, Mrs. Pritchard stood stiff and unsmiling behind the counter. Catherine moved through the aisles, gathering cotton fabric, thread, and a small bottle of camphor oil. When she placed them on the counter, Mrs. Pritchard spoke without meeting her eyes. That'll be $4. Her voice was colder than the Montana wind. Catherine counted out every coin. As she reached for her purchases, Mrs. Pritchard's daughter tilted her head and asked, loud enough to cut through the entire store, Mama, why would a decent man accept damaged goods? Silence crashed down. Catherine's hand went still. Some women have no shame, Mrs. Pritchard added, her gaze sharpening. trapping lonely men with another man's mistake. Heat crawled up Catherine's neck, but she lifted her chin. The fabric, please. Mrs. Pritchard slid the items forward with slow, deliberate contempt. Catherine gathered them with trembling hands and turned toward the door, only to find her path blocked by a striking woman in an emerald green dress watching her with unreadable eyes. Vera Holcomb, the wealthiest widow in 3 counties. "So this is the little prize Silas chose," Vera said, her voice dripping poison. "Tell me, dear, does he know the father? Or was it so many you've lost count?" Catherine's hands tightened on her packages. "Excuse me." "I've known Silas Corrigan for 7 years. Been there through his darkest times. Then you arrive, belly full of another man's child, and suddenly he's playing savior." Vera stepped closer. "Whatever lies you told him, whatever trap you've set, it won't last. This town won't accept you. And when Silas realizes what a mistake he's made, you'll have nowhere to go." Catherine met Vera's eyes. "Silas knew exactly what he was getting when he took me from that depot. He chose me, knowing everything. That's more than you can say after 7 years of chasing him." Vera's face went crimson. "How dare you?" "I dare because I'm his wife. And if you have a problem with that, take it up with him." Catherine pushed past her and out the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She made it to the wagon before her hands started shaking. By the time she reached the ranch, the entire encounter had spread through town like wildfire. Silas's ranch hand, Tom, met her at the barn with the news. "Mr. Corrigan rode into town. An hour ago, heard what happened at the store." Catherine's stomach dropped. "Where is he now?" "Still in town, ma'am." She found him 2 hours later, standing in the middle of the general store with half the town gathered outside. His voice carried through the open door. "Catherine is my wife in every way that matters. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me. That includes you, Vera. You, Mrs. Pritchard, and anyone else who thinks they have a right to judge her." Vera stood in the corner, her face twisted with humiliation. She came here alone, carrying a child, with nowhere else to turn. That takes more courage than most of you will ever know. Silas's eyes swept the room. "I made my choice with open eyes. Question it again, and you'll answer to me." Catherine stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. Silas turned and saw her. Something shifted in his expression, softening. He walked past the silent crowd and took her arm gently. "Let's go home." As they climbed into the wagon, Catherine whispered, "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Silas said, snapping the reins, "I did." The ride back was quiet, but Catherine noticed Silas's hand resting close to hers on the bench, not touching, but there, present, protective. That evening, the distance between them felt smaller than it ever had before. After Silas's defense in town, something changed between them. The careful distance began to crack. Catherine stood at the stove one evening stirring stew when the baby kicked so hard she gasped. The spoon clattered into the pot. Silas was beside her instantly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Catherine smiled through sudden tears. "The baby's just active tonight." She saw the longing in his face, the way his eyes dropped to her belly, then away, as if he didn't have the right to look. "Here." Catherine took his hand before she could second-guess herself. She pressed his palm flat against where the baby moved. Silas went rigid. Then the baby kicked again, solid and strong against his hand. He made a sound like a wounded animal. Tears spilled down his weathered cheeks. His other hand joined the first, cradling her belly with a gentleness that broke Catherine's heart. "I can feel it," he whispered. "I can feel the life." Catherine covered his hands with hers. They stood there, the stew forgotten, while the baby rolled and kicked beneath their joined palms. "Margaret was 6 months along when she died," Silas said, his voice raw. "I never got to feel our baby move. The doctor said it was too early. I always wondered what it felt like. Now you know." Silas looked at her, really looked at her, and Catherine saw past the grief to the man underneath, a man capable of fierce love and devastating loss, a man fighting his way back to the light. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" "For being distant, for being afraid, for not giving you the marriage you deserved when you answered that advertisement." Catherine shook her head. "I didn't answer your advertisement expecting love, Silas. I answered it desperate for safety, a roof over my head, a chance for this baby to have a life. You've given me all that and more. But you deserve more than survival. So do you." The baby kicked again, and they both felt it. Silas's thumb traced a gentle circle on her belly. "If you're willing," Catherine continued carefully, "maybe we could try for something beyond survival, not all at once, just small steps." Silas's throat worked. "I don't know if I remember how." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out together." He nodded, unable to speak. That night, he didn't return to the barn loft. Instead, he pulled the chair beside Catherine's bed and sat watch as he had that night after the false labor. But this time, when Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, he held on. "Tell me about the baby's father," Silas said quietly. "Not the leaving. Tell me who he was before that." Catherine stiffened. "Why?" "Because this child deserves to know the truth someday, not the version where I pretend to be something I'm not, the honest version." So Catherine told him about Dalton Greer's charm and smooth words, about how he'd made her feel seen in a house where her father cared only for business and reputation, about the promises he'd made under the Philadelphia moon. "He had kind eyes," she said. "That's what fooled me. I thought kind eyes meant a kind heart." "Some people are good at wearing masks," Silas said. "And you? What mask do you wear?" "None. I'm exactly what you see, a broken man trying not to break anyone else." Catherine squeezed his hand. "You're not broken, you're healing. There's a difference." "Am I?" "Yes, because broken men don't build cradles." Silas looked toward the corner where the oak cradle sat, half finished, shavings still scattered around its base. "I started that 3 nights ago. Couldn't sleep, so I worked. Figured the baby would need it soon. It's beautiful. It's necessary." He paused. "Catherine, when the time comes, when the baby's born, I need you to know something. This child will be mine in every way that matters. Blood doesn't make a father. Choice does. And I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you both." Catherine couldn't stop the sob that escaped. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because you chose to survive when everything told you to give up. Because you stood in that store and faced down Vera Holcomb with more grace than I've seen in years. Because when I touch you and feel that baby move, I remember what it feels like to want to live again." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against their joined hands. "I'm still afraid," he whispered, "but I'm more afraid of missing this than of losing it." Outside, the Montana night pressed close, but inside, something warm and fragile took root. October arrived with frost silvering the morning grass. Catherine's belly had grown so large she could barely glimpse her own feet. The baby was close, so close she could feel the change in the air. And Silas changed with it. The hollow-eyed widower she'd met at the depot had vanished, replaced by a man driven by purpose. He finished the cradle, carving delicate wildflowers into the headboard with a tenderness that felt almost reverent. He rode all the way to the Gunderson ranch and traded 2 cattle for a stack of baby blankets and tiny clothes. "Mrs. Gunderson's daughter outgrew these," he said, as he laid them neatly on the kitchen table. "She told me to tell you, welcome to motherhood." Catherine ran her fingers across the soft fabrics, her throat tightening. "You didn't have to do all this." "Yes," he said quietly, "I did." She watched him organize everything with careful intention, blankets folded perfectly, diapers stacked within reach, a small basin set aside for bathing. He'd considered details she hadn't thought to imagine. One evening, as she struggled to lace her boots, Silas knelt before her without a word. His hands were gentle, steady, practiced. "Are you afraid?" she whispered. "Of what's coming?" His hands paused, the laces held loosely between his fingers. "Terrified," he admitted. "Me too. But I'm more afraid of missing this chance than facing my fears." He looked up at her. "Catherine, I need to tell you something. When Margaret went into labor, I froze. I let the doctor take over completely. I stood in the corner like a coward while she screamed, and when it was over, when she was gone, I hated myself for not being stronger. You weren't a coward. You were grieving. I was useless." He finished lacing her boots and sat back on his heels. "But I won't be useless this time. Whatever happens, I'll be there. I'll fight for you both." Catherine cupped his face in her hands. "I know you will." That night, lying in bed with Silas in his usual chair beside her, Catherine spoke into the darkness. "I used to pray this baby wouldn't have Dalton's eyes. I was so afraid every time I looked at this child I'd see him, see the man who abandoned us. And now? Now I hope this baby has your eyes, your steadiness, your strength." Silas's breath caught. "Catherine, I mean it. You're more of a father to this child than Dalton ever could be. You've been here for every kick, every movement, every moment of fear. You've built a cradle and gathered clothes and promised to fight when the time comes. That's what makes someone a father, not blood, choice." Silas stood and crossed to the bed. He sat on the edge, closer than he'd ever been. In the moonlight streaming through the window, Catherine saw tears on his cheeks. "I need to make you a promise," he said. "This child will be mine in every way that matters. Legally, I'll adopt them as soon as possible. They'll carry the Corrigan name. They'll inherit this ranch, and no one, not Dalton Greer or anyone else, will ever take that from them." "Silas, let me finish." He took her hand. "You came here with nothing but courage and a baby in your belly. You faced down this town's judgment. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning." Catherine pulled him closer until his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," she whispered. The words hung between them, fragile and precious. Silas pulled back just enough to see her face. "You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. I fell in love with you somewhere between your defense in the general store and the cradle you carved in the dark. Maybe even before that. Maybe the moment you took my bag at the depot and didn't send me away." Silas's hand trembled as he touched her face. "I fell for you the second you stepped off that stagecoach, not in spite of your condition, because of the courage it took to show up anyway." He kissed her then, soft and tentative, like a man relearning something he'd thought lost forever. Catherine kissed him back, tasting salt and hope and the promise of a future neither had dared imagine. When they pulled apart, Silas remained on the bed, lying beside her for the first time. His hand rested protectively on her belly, and when the baby kicked in response, they both smiled in the darkness. The contractions started just after midnight on a cold October night. Catherine woke with a gasp, clutching her belly. Silas was beside her instantly. "It's time," she whispered. Silas's face went pale, but his hand stayed steady. "I'll get the doctor." He was dressed and mounted within minutes, riding hard toward town. Catherine gripped the bed frame, breathing through the pain. Each contraction felt like being torn apart. Silas returned an hour later, soaked and alone. Catherine saw the panic in his eyes before he spoke. "The creek's flooded. Bridge washed out. Doctor can't cross until morning." Catherine's breath caught. "No, no, Silas, I can't do this without—" "You won't have to." He stripped off his wet coat and knelt beside the bed. "I'm here. We'll do this together. You don't know how. I know enough." His voice was firm, steady. "I watched Margaret's labor. I know what the doctor did. What went wrong? I won't let that happen to you. Another contraction seized her. Catherine screamed, gripping Silas's hand hard enough to draw blood. He didn't flinch. I'm going to die, she sobbed when the pain eased. Like Margaret, I'm going to die in this baby. No. Silas gripped her face, forcing her to look at him. You're not Margaret. This isn't the same. You're strong, Catherine, stronger than anyone I've ever known. You're going to survive this, and so is our baby. Our baby, Catherine repeated, tears streaming. Our baby, Silas confirmed. The hours blurred into agony. Silas boiled water, gathered clean linens, talked Catherine through each contraction with a calmness that belied his terror. He told her about the ranch, about the life they'd build, about the child who would grow up, running through Montana fields. Tell me more, Catherine gasped between pains. Keep talking. So he did. He talked about teaching their daughter to ride, about Christmas mornings and summer storms, about growing old together on the porch, watching grandchildren play. Daughter? Catherine managed a weak smile. You think it's a girl? I know it is. She's got your stubbornness. Dawn broke pink and gold through the window. The contractions came faster, harder. Catherine was exhausted, trembling, certain she couldn't endure another moment. I can't, she sobbed. Silas, I can't. Yes, you can. Look at me. He wiped her face with a cool cloth. You survived your father's rejection. You survived traveling alone across half the country. You survived Vera Holcomb and this town's judgment. You can survive this. I'm scared. So am I. But we're scared together, remember? Catherine nodded, gathering what strength remained. The next contraction came like a wave, and with it, an overwhelming urge to push. That's it, Silas encouraged. I can see the head. One more, Catherine, just one more. She bore down with everything she had, screaming until her throat was raw. Then suddenly, impossibly, the pressure released. A baby's cry filled the room. Silas's hands shook as he caught the tiny, squirming body. It's a girl, he said, his voice breaking. Catherine, we have a daughter. He placed the baby on Catherine's chest. She was small but fierce, her face red with outrage, her tiny fists waving. Dark hair plastered to her head, eyes squeezed shut as she wailed. Catherine sobbed, holding their daughter close. She's perfect. Silas collapsed beside the bed, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Catherine reached for him with her free hand. We did it, she whispered. He looked up, his face wet with tears and something that looked like wonder. You did it. You're both alive. You're both here. The baby quieted, nuzzling against Catherine's skin. Silas reached out tentatively and touched the baby's tiny hand. Her fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. Hello, little one, he whispered. Welcome to the world. Catherine watched him fall in love in real time, watched years of grief crack and fall away as he stared at this small miracle they'd brought into the world together. What should we name her? Catherine asked. Silas looked at her, then at their daughter. Joanna. It means God's grace. Joanna Corrigan. Catherine tested the name. It's perfect. Outside, the storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting everything gold. And in that small room in the Montana wilderness, a family was born. Joanna had been in the world for 3 weeks, and Silas had barely slept. Not from exhaustion, but from wonder. He couldn't stop watching her. Catherine found him one midnight standing over the cradle, just staring at their daughter's sleeping face. She's still there, Catherine whispered from the bed, smiling. No, I just keep thinking she might disappear if I look away. He'd learned to change diapers with fumbling determination, learned to soothe midnight cries by walking circles around the room, singing old trail songs in his rough voice. Learned that babies were tougher than they looked and more exhausting than cattle drives. Catherine watched him discover fatherhood like a man learning to breathe underwater. Clumsy at first, then gradually natural. One evening, as Silas rocked Joanna to sleep, Catherine spoke the words she'd been holding back. "I love you, Silas. Properly. Completely." He looked up. Joanna nestled in his arms. "I fell in love with you before I even knew your name. Just took me a while to admit it." "What changed?" "You did. You walked into my life carrying someone else's child and made me remember what it meant to be alive." He glanced down at Joanna. "She did. This little girl who isn't mine by blood but is mine in every way that counts." Catherine crossed to them. She kissed Silas softly, carefully, so as not to wake the baby. "We should make this official," Silas said. "A real marriage, not just survival. I thought we already were married on paper, but I want to stand before God in this territory and promise you everything. The ranch, my name, whatever future we build." Catherine's eyes filled. "Yes." They married quietly 3 days later in the small church, with only the preacher and Tom as witness. Joanna slept through the ceremony in Catherine's arms. When Silas kissed his bride, he tasted salt from her tears and his own. The town's attitude shifted like wind. They saw Silas at church every Sunday. Joanna cradled in his arms, Catherine beside him. They saw him in town buying supplies with the baby strapped to his chest in a sling Catherine had sewn. They saw a man transformed by love. Even Vera Holcomb couldn't maintain her bitterness when she watched Silas show off Joanna to anyone who'd look. "She's got your stubbornness," Catherine teased one morning, watching Joanna refuse the bottle. "She's got your strength," Silas countered, finally coaxing the baby to eat. Tom helped more around the ranch so Silas could spend mornings with his family. Silas hired another hand with money he couldn't quite spare, but Catherine's happiness was worth more than gold. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Joanna asleep between them, Catherine took Silas's hand. "I'm pregnant." Silas's head snapped around. "What?" "I'm pregnant. Our baby, yours and mine." For a moment, she saw the old fear flash across his face. Then it vanished, replaced by something fierce and joyful. "How long have you known?" 2 weeks. I wanted to be sure." Silas pulled her close, careful not to wake Joanna. "I'm not afraid this time." "You're not?" "I'm terrified," he admitted, "but I'm more excited than afraid. Does that make sense?" Catherine laughed. "Perfect sense." He kissed her temple, then looked down at Joanna. "You hear that? Little one, you're going to be a big sister." Joanna stirred but didn't wake. The Montana sky burned orange and purple above them. 5 years ago, Silas said quietly, I stood at Margaret's grave and thought my life was over. Thought I'd never feel anything but grief again. And now? Now I have a wife who walked into my life carrying another man's child and made me whole. A daughter who isn't mine by blood but is mine by choice. And another baby coming who'll carry both our names. He shook his head in wonder. I don't deserve this. Yes, Catherine said firmly, you do. You deserve every bit of happiness this world can give you. Silas looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 8 months pregnant and terrified, who'd faced down this town's judgment, who'd brought his heart back to life. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For answering my advertisement, for being brave enough to show up, for giving me a reason to stop being afraid. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. Joanna slept peacefully. Inside Catherine's belly, new life stirred. The ranch that had been a tomb for 5 years was now a home. And the man who'd thought he'd never love again had discovered his heart was bigger than he'd ever imagined. Joanna was 6 months old when Dalton Greer rode into Sweetwater Basin. Catherine was in town buying sugar when she saw him through the store window. Her blood turned to ice. That face she'd tried to forget, that smile that had once made her believe in fairy tales. He spotted her before she could run. Catherine. He tipped his hat like they were old friends. You're looking well. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. I've come to see my daughter. Those 4 words shattered her world. Catherine ran. She climbed into the wagon and drove home faster than was safe, her hands shaking on the reins. Silas was in the barn when she arrived, working leather. "He's here," she gasped. "Dalton's here." Silas dropped the harness. "Where?" "Town. He knows about Joanna. He wants to see her." Silas pulled Catherine close. "He won't touch her, I promise you." But Dalton arrived at the ranch the next morning, well-dressed and confident. Silas met him at the property line, rifle in hand. "You're not welcome here." Dalton smiled. "I'm not here to cause trouble, friend, just want to see my child." "You gave up that right when you abandoned Catherine in Philadelphia. Did she tell you that story?" Dalton laughed. "I'm sure she did. The poor abandoned maiden, very touching. But legally, that's my daughter. I have rights." Silas cocked the rifle. "Get off my land." "I've spoken to a lawyer. Territorial law favors the biological father. I could take that child from you tomorrow." Catherine appeared in the doorway, Joanna in her arms. "What do you want, Dalton?" His eyes flickered to the baby. "She's pretty. Got your hair." "Answer the question." Dalton's smile faded. $2,000. Sign over. "Your rights, leave Montana Territory, and I'll forget this child exists." "You're selling your own daughter?" Catherine's voice shook with rage. "I'm being practical. You clearly want to play house with the rancher. I need money to start a business in California. We all get what we want." Silas lowered the rifle slowly. "Give me 3 days. 2. I'm not a patient man." Dalton tipped his hat and rode away. Catherine sank onto the porch steps, clutching Joanna. "We don't have that kind of money." "I know." Silas knelt before her. "But we'll find it. I'll sell the cattle, take a loan against the ranch, whatever it takes. You'd lose everything you've built." "Catherine, look at me." He cupped her face. "This ranch is just land. You and Joanna are my life. There's no choice here." That night, Silas rode to every rancher within 50 miles. He sold half his herd at desperate prices. He went to the bank and mortgaged the ranch his grandfather had homesteaded. He traded away 5 years of careful savings and future security. Tom tried to talk him out of it. "Boss, you're ruining yourself." "I'm saving my family." 2 days later, Silas met Dalton at the saloon with a leather satchel. He dropped it on the table between them. $2,100 in cash and promissory notes. "Count it," Silas said. Dalton's eyes gleamed as he rifled through the money. "Pleasure doing business." "Not yet." Silas pulled out a legal document. "You sign this first. Gives up all parental rights. States you'll never contact Catherine or Joanna again. Confirms you're leaving Montana Territory permanently. And if I refuse?" Silas leaned close. "Then I make sure every judge in this territory knows you're an extortionist who tried to sell his own child. I'll hunt you down myself and make sure you face charges. Your choice." Dalton studied him, saw the steel beneath the calm exterior, and signed. Silas watched him ride out of town, then returned home to find Catherine waiting on the porch, Joanna asleep in her arms. "It's done," he said. "He's gone. Signed away all rights. She's legally mine now." Catherine burst into tears. Silas climbed the steps and wrapped his arms around both of them. "We'll rebuild," he whispered. "The cattle will multiply. The ranch will recover. But Joanna is ours forever. That's worth everything." Catherine held him tight. This man who'd given up his security for a child that wasn't his by blood, who'd proven that love was always, always a choice. The months after Dalton's departure were the hardest Silas had known since Margaret's death. The ranch that had once thrived now struggled. The reduced herd meant less income. The mortgage payment came due every month like clockwork. But Catherine refused to let them drown. She started baking pies and selling them to the hotel in town. Apple, cherry, peach, when the fruit was available. The hotel owner's wife spread word, and soon Catherine had orders from 3 towns over. She baked through the night. While Joanna slept, her hands dusted with flour, her belly growing with their second child. Silas worked sunrise to sunset, stretching every dollar, rebuilding the herd one calf at a time. Tom stayed on despite delayed wages, loyal to the end. Slowly, painfully, they clawed their way back. 1 year after Joanna's birth, Silas rode to the courthouse in Helena with the adoption papers. Judge Morrison reviewed them carefully. This child's biological father signed away his rights? Yes, sir. Notarized and witnessed. The judge stamped the documents. Then Joanna Corrigan is legally your daughter. Congratulations, Mr. Corrigan. Silas rode home with the papers pressed against his chest, feeling something settle in his soul. That evening he found Catherine on the porch, Joanna taking wobbly steps between the railing posts. She's walking, Catherine said, laughing as Joanna toppled onto her bottom and immediately tried again. She's a Corrigan, Silas said. We don't stay down. He showed Catherine the adoption papers. She read them through tears, then kissed him like she was trying to say everything words couldn't capture. Joanna toddled over and grabbed Silas's leg, demanding to be picked up. He lifted her high and she squealed with delight. Dada, Joanna said clearly. Silas froze. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth. Did she just... Dada, Joanna repeated, patting his face with her small hands. Silas held his daughter close, overcome. This child who'd been in Catherine's belly when they met, who he'd delivered with his own shaking hands, who taught him that love was deeper than blood. Catherine moved beside them, her hand on her swollen belly. I felt the baby kick today, strong like Joanna was. Boy or girl? Does it matter? Not even a little bit. They stood together in the fading light, watching the Montana sky turn purple and gold. The ranch was smaller than it had been, but it was theirs. The debts would be paid. The herd would grow. And this family, built from desperation and courage and impossible choices, would endure. Do you remember what you said that first night? Catherine asked. That we'd help each other survive? I remember. We did more than survive, Silas. We built something beautiful. He pulled her close, careful of her belly, with Joanna nestled between them. The day you stepped off that stagecoach, 8 months pregnant and terrified, I thought you were the answer to a prayer I'd been too afraid to say. Turns out, you were the answer to prayers I didn't even know I had. I was running from shame. I found home instead. Joanna squirmed, wanting down. They set her loose to toddle around the porch, and Silas kept one hand on Catherine's belly, feeling the new life moving beneath his palm. What should we name this one? Catherine asked. If it's a boy, James, after my grandfather who built this ranch. And if it's a girl? Margaret. Silas's voice caught. If that's all right with you. Catherine took his face in her hands. It's perfect. She'd be honored. The baby kicked hard, as if in agreement. Joanna plopped down on the porch boards, examining a beetle with intense concentration. The cattle lowed in the distance. Somewhere a coyote called to the rising moon. Silas looked at his wife, at his daughter, at the life growing between them, and felt gratitude so profound it hurt. He'd been a man buried alive in grief, convinced his story had ended in that room where Margaret died. But Catherine had arrived carrying another man's child and somehow resurrected him, had shown him that endings could become beginnings if you were brave enough to let them. Thank you, he whispered. Catherine smiled. For what? For answering my advertisement. For being courageous enough to step off that stagecoach. For giving me a family I thought I'd lost forever. She kissed him softly. Thank you for seeing past the shame. For choosing us when you could have turned away. For proving that love is always, always a choice. Joanna toddled over, beetle clutched in her fist. Dada, look! Silas bent down to admire her treasure, and Catherine watched her husband become the father she'd always dreamed of, but never dared hope for. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with nothing but courage and a child in her belly had become the heart of a legacy that would endure for generations. And the childless rancher who'd wept with joy at the depot had discovered that sometimes the greatest blessings came wrapped in the most unexpected packages. Their story wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, built on ashes and hope, on loss and redemption, on the simple truth that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about choice. And they had chosen each other over and over again until choosing became as natural as breathing. If this story touched your heart, click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales of love, courage, and second chances. Because sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to build.